presentation, right? Always presentation. That's always presentation. Slides only. See everybody just fine now. What's the light on?
Looks like the browser came out.
Video kathin
Money's video is okay.
Yes.
You have 63 seconds. Excuse me. Hello. 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 Now that session chair we have has arrived, so let's start the final session. We'll give you 43 seconds to complete your design, and then we will move over to the final session. Challenges and opportunities in building disruptive business models. Unfortunately, nobody is listening to me. Hello, hello. May I request everyone to be seated? We are now on to the final session. We have two speakers, Mani Kulasurya, who will discuss common characteristics of disruptive business models, and then we have Brian Beach from Cisco. Cisco is not the router company, but it is a different Cisco, SYSCO, world's largest food service company, okay, which is in a very challenging business and operate in a highly challenging, supply chain and a highly complex supply chain. There are a lot to learn from Brian when it comes to developing disruptive business models for large organizations. We have Dumi. I don't think anybody he needs any introduction. And then Werner from Leapset, and Shahani Marcus, who's a serial entrepreneur and academic researcher. What else? Okay, everything in between. And over to you, Rohan. Thank you, and please put your hands together and welcome our speakers.
Lakshman tells me that whoever wins it's going to win a prize that's going to make their wildest dreams come true. I don't know what that is, but he promised the wildest dreams will come true. Thank you. We are the guys who are going to be between you and maybe cocktails, which is probably not a very nice or a nice place to be depending on how you look at it. In the light of trying to understand disruptive innovation, I read this and I'm just reading out disruptive innovation, a term of art coined by Clayton Christensen. And apparently he's the gentleman that you should be reading up about if you want to study what disruptive innovation is all about. Describes a process by which a product or service takes root initially in simple applications at the bottom of a market and then relentlessly moves upmarket, eventually displacing established competitors. So that's the definition I could read and I think was closest to me. And today being a long day, in no way I'm going to try to sugarcoat that. At the beginning, you heard a little bit about whether you are ready for disruptive innovation. Second part, people asked about the leadership, the type of leadership that is required to be disruptive and innovative. The other one, the third section is about customer-centric disruptive innovation. The session before that, before this one, was focusing about user experience. Right now, this session is focused about building business model. So technically after today, you technically should be able to build a business model that is disruptive in nature. With that, Mani, I'd like to invite you for the first keynote speak.
All right. Thanks everyone for having me here. Given it's the last session and you guys are probably wanting to go home, I'm going to make this keynote not just a little bit fun, I'm also going to make it controversial. So let me start with a quick story. The precursor to LeapSet was a company called Monvia. For a lack of a better description, Monvia was a product incubator. In the 4 years that we were around, we built half a dozen products that ranged from a mobile payments company to a Wall Street analytics platform. And LeapSet was one of the companies that we incubated there. We also had, we had this nice incubator space. It was an old car workshop that we had converted into an incubator space in Mountain View in Silicon Valley. And we had extra space and extra infrastructure. So we had a shared workspace for other startups that, with like-minded founders because, geeks like to hang around with other geeks. So in October of 2009, these two guys showed up with an idea. That's Brian and Jan. And the idea was a simple idea, but a very, very complex technology. They wanted to build a global communications platform that was both career agnostic and device agnostic. Right? We knew each other from Yahoo. That's where we all came from. And we all kind of left Yahoo more or less the same time. Myself, Jim, my co-founder, these guys. And we left Yahoo for the same reason. Yahoo had grown to a bigger company with management structures and processes, and it was no longer fun. It was hard to do the really cool stuff, right? So we left out of frustration. Brian actually first tried to get a job at what were then cool startups. He first went to Twitter and got turned down. He then went to Facebook and he got turned down. He tweeted that. So, based on that and based on his, real drive to wanting to start a new company, he decided to do his own company. 6 years later, WhatsApp was sold for $19 billion back to Facebook. They should have given Brian that job, right? So, what made WhatsApp so special? I bet half the people in this audience use WhatsApp, and the other half definitely know what it is, right? But how do you know that this was such a special company or such a disruptive company in its early days, in its first 2 years when we were all shacked up together in a car workshop in Mountain View, right? How do you identify that? How do you see the disruptive business models before they actually become disruptive? Why is it that all the large telecoms out there, with all the resources and wherewithal they have, why didn't they build WhatsApp, right? And to understand fundamentally the answer to this question, you have to understand a little bit about rational thinking. Turns out, most disruptive companies, I would argue all disruptive companies, are irrational in their thinking. So I remember in the early days having a conversation with Jan, and it went a little bit as follows. So we're sitting down, and he's telling me what he wants to do with WhatsApp. First of all, I thought that's a ridiculous name, but that's okay. Then he said, we're going to charge our customers $1 per year, right, for unlimited messaging, right? And I looked at him and I said, well, at that price point, you'll probably acquire a lot of customers, but you need tens of millions of customers to be able to build a profitable business. If you get tens of millions of customers, what's going to happen? The carriers that you're relying on, whose backbones that you're running your software on, are going to shut you down because they have a very lucrative revenue model coming from text messaging, and you're essentially giving that product away for free. Well, here's $19 billion that proved that I was wrong. So, what does a disruptive startup look like in its early days, right? This is the hard question to answer. A venture firm called Shasta Ventures, a VC in Silicon Valley, tried to answer exactly that question. So they took a look at all these companies that you see up on the screen. These are all companies that have gotten to $1 billion plus valuation in a very short time frame. And what they wanted to see was what did each one of these companies look like in its first year or first 2 years of life, in the early days. What were some common characteristics that these companies had? Here's what they found. Of course, most of the time it's only apparent in retrospect. In hindsight, we all can say, hey, Uber is such a disruptive company, or Airbnb is such a disruptive company. But, could you really tell that in the early days? And most of the time the answer is no. But all of them, every single one of them, had these 4 characteristics, right? They were a crazy idea, right? Think about the Brian Chesky, who showed up from Airbnb and said, you know what, there's an unused asset in all of our homes, right? It's called that extra bedroom or the couch, right? And there's a bunch of people out there who would much rather go sleep in my unused bedroom instead of the hotel. We're going to build a platform that enables that. It's a crazy idea, right? Almost every single one of them entered very competitive markets, right? Every single one of them, right, reinvented the user experience. They changed the way the user does something in a drastic measure, right? And in every single one of these startups, the founders were industry outsiders, right? Now think about it. If somebody came to you and gave you a crazy idea in a highly competitive market where to succeed they need to completely change user behavior and they are clueless about the industry, are you going to invest in them? If such a person came to you and you're an executive or a board member in a large company and said, this is a project that I wanted to start and had these characteristics, would you invest in them? Probably not. But these were exactly the characteristics that were common across all those disruptive companies. So is there any way to predict if a startup or an idea can be disruptive or not in the early days? Is there some kind of a framework that we can use? And I don't know if there is, and maybe there is, but I'm going to try something with you. So over the last 5 years, I've been dabbling with angel investing. I've invested in 22 very early stage startups. I'm not good at it. I haven't made money doing it, but I do have fun doing it. But to do it in some kind of a sane manner, I built this framework for myself, right? And what I'm going to take you through right now is a fairly high-level summarized version of that framework. So I call that the spectrum of disruption opportunity, right? And it has these 5 spectrums. And what you want to do is you want to score as high as possible in each one of these spectrums, right? And the higher you score across the entire spectrum, the higher the likelihood that you're building a company or your idea can be disruptive. The first one is obvious, market size. The bigger the market, the better. The second one, frequency of use. The reason this is important is that the more opportunity you give your customer to interact with your product, to touch your product, the higher the likelihood that you're going to be able to change the user experience of that customer, right? So frequency of use is important. No regulation is again a given. Industries that are not regulated are easier to disrupt. However, in highly regulated industries like banking and healthcare are now starting to see some disruption. Demographics and infrastructure, right? So the example of demographics that we've heard over and over again in the past sessions is the millennials, right? They think differently, they work differently, they live differently, they have different aspirations. To be able to leverage that change in demographic shift makes it, gets you going towards disruption. The best example of infrastructure, of course, is the mobile phone, and even better, the smartphone, which means tens of millions of customers. You can now give them a much more enhanced, continuous user experience because they got the phone in their pocket. However, I believe that the most important of the 5 spectrums is customer pain. If there is something that the customer is doing today, and it's actually inefficient or too expensive or in some way painful, those are the opportunities that are, that give the biggest opportunity to disrupt, right? So these are the 5 spectrums. So now let's apply this very quickly to 4 companies that we all consider are very innovative, very disruptive companies. Uber scores across the board. By the way, I'm trying purposefully to do this in hindsight, like as if looking at these companies in its early days. Uber scores, pretty high across the board. Airbnb is all over the place. The biggest problem that Airbnb has is the frequency of use issue, right? How do you change user experience when you only go on vacation maybe, once or twice a year? Snapchat scores are very high across the board, except there really is no customer pain that they're solving for. And Tesla, again, much like Airbnb, is kind of in the middle. Now you'd say, okay, well, then the spectrum doesn't really matter. Well, I do admit that you don't have to score high across the board to be disruptive. But if you look at each one of them and think about Uber, they've gotten to a $50 billion valuation in 5 years, right? Airbnb, on the other hand, has gotten to a $20 billion valuation in 8 years, right? Snapchat has a $10 billion valuation in also about 5 years. Tesla, right? A phenomenal company run by probably one of the best entrepreneurs that has ever lived, has reached a $32 billion valuation in 12 years, right? So what that means is that while you don't have to score high on the entire spectrum, the higher you score, the better. And if you don't score high, then you have to work a little bit harder, right? You have to build a better product, design more. And in many cases, you're going to have to innovate, outside of the core product offering, right? Tesla, again, is the best example for this, which is building the world's best electric car wasn't sufficient to make that company a disruptive company. They also had to go figure out the battery technology that powered those cars. They also had to build a nationwide supercharger network, because otherwise how do you drive the electric cars? So they had to build all these periphery innovations as well to create the disruption, right? Whereas Uber, I'm going to overly simplify, but all they really need is an app, right? So higher you score, the easier your life will be. But I do want to make a point that no industry is safe. Any industry can be disrupted, right? So now I'm going to tell you another quick story about a company that nobody's heard of, right? A company called Maven. It's a 2-year-old company, and I invested in them, which is why I know about these guys, and it's fascinating to have seen how they've grown in the last 2 years. To understand what Maven does, you need to understand a little bit about their industry, and this is going to be pretty far off for everybody, but I'll try anyway. If you see an African American lady with long straight hair, it's very likely it's not her hair, right? So it's natural hair, right? But she's wearing hair extensions. These hair extensions come from India. They get shipped to China, where they are cleaned and packaged. Then they get sent to the US, where this is a $1 billion industry, by the way. And there's a network of mostly Korean-run mom-and-pop shops that are inside the African-American neighborhoods that actually sell the hair to the customers, right? So that's how the industry works today. So this is a picture of the hairdresser who is the expert in, it's a complex job of weaving these hair extensions into your natural hair. I promise this story has a happy ending. So the hairdressers that do this in the African American community, they are about 40,000 strong, and most of them are sole proprietors. So they're very good at their job, and they have really good relationship with their customers who show up once every 3 to 4 months and spend about $400 per session to get their hair extensions done. But they're not savvy business people, and they don't have the business wherewithal or the capital to be able to hold inventory. Otherwise, they would be selling the products as well. So what they do is they tell their customer, well, here are the products that you need to buy for your next hair appointment, and then they send them off to this guy, right? This is what one of those Korean stores look like. Not a very pleasant shopping experience at all, right? So along comes Maven, and what they do is, fundamentally disrupt the model, right? So they bring their branded, hair supplies. That's the product, right? But they don't sell it in any retail location. They don't even try to sell it to the end customer directly. So they built a shopping platform, a mobile-only shopping platform. So it just runs on smartphones. It's an app, right? That runs on that hairdresser's mobile phone. So the next time the customer comes in, the hairdresser basically says, well, here are the products that you should be buying, right? Picks them right there, drops them into a shopping cart, takes the customer's credit card, swipes it, right? Sends the order to Maven, and Maven FedExes the products directly to the hairdresser to be used the next time around. And every time they do that, the hairdresser gets 20%, right? So not only did they make the shopping experience significantly more pleasant for the end customer, they also created a brand new business model, a brand new distribution channel, because now the hairdresser has a revenue stream that they previously did not have, right? That's the kind. This is a very simple example, but it is simple stuff like this. Uber is pretty simple too. That really gets to disrupt industries, right? Find the pain and fix it, right? And then everything else falls into place. So, can anyone build a disruptive company? In my opinion, yes. As I look out to this audience, I'm convinced that there's a handful of people here that are going to go and build some disruptive stuff. It may not be $1 billion company, but nevertheless, it's going to have a disruptive impact. Here's the controversial part. All of you can do it, but not if you work for a big company. Right? So, why is that, right? For these following reasons. Big companies have all these problems that they need to deal with, right? These are all things that you have to overcome to be able to be disruptive inside of a big company, right? You have to worry about your existing products, your existing customers, your existing brand, your existing business model, your existing margins, etc. And when you have to worry about all of that, how the heck are you going to be disruptive, right? Second, we all know decision-making takes a long time in a big company. It's all relative, but I'll tell you, in our company, in a startup, we make a decision in the morning. By mid-afternoon, we're executing on it. The decision may be wrong, right? So we'll find out on Wednesday that it's wrong, so we'll change the decision, and by Wednesday afternoon, we're executing again, right? It's very difficult to do that in a big company. Most decisions in big companies are also data-driven, right? So if it's something disruptive, by definition, it's something that is fundamentally different to the way things are happening today. What kind of data do you think is available to figure out something that is fundamentally different in the future? Most of the time, the data doesn't exist. You have to be comfortable to make decisions with minimal data, make gut decisions, right? The more successful the company, the harder it is. If you are today the market leader in whatever business that you're in, then you are in a pretty good position. Why change a good thing, right? So this creates a culture of not disrupting. And then a big one is failure equals a loss of credibility, right? Think about the executive who came and pitched the great idea and finally got permission to do it and ran off and did it, and a year later the idea turns out to be a failure. So he comes back and he pitches another idea, and everybody's like, well, it's that guy again, right? So these are all things that you need to overcome in a big company, and these are all the reasons why disruption cannot happen in a big company. Startups, however, have a massive advantage, right? Most startups in the early days, like Jan and Brian and Jan in WhatsApp, are 2 or 3 guys, 2 or 3 laptops, a couch, and no money, right? So where do you go from there? You can't go down from there. I mean, maybe the laptop breaks, but you can only go up, right? So startups have nothing to lose, so startups are able to take all this risk, right? And do all the things, and that's the advantage that they have. I have proof, right? When a disruptive startup decides to build an electric car, they build something like this, right? It's a beautiful design, and probably one of the best built cars, not just electric cars, probably one of the best built cars ever, right? When a big company decides to build an electric car, they build this. Looks like a frog. Right. So, actually, I'm just kidding, because the Nissan Leaf is the best-selling electric car in the world. They sell more units than any other electric car. However, if you look closely, it's pretty clear that they designed the car and they found a price point, etc., to fill a certain niche, and consciously a car that is not about to cannibalize their other model lines, right? So therefore not disruptive. Nobody really says that the Nissan Leaf is disruptive, although it's the best-selling electric car in the world. Everybody says Tesla is disruptive, right? So I'm a big company executive. What do I do in this situation, right? I think I missed the video, right? That's okay. Okay. I'm going to go back. Okay, so sorry. There was a video coming so threw me off a little bit. I'm going to change my mind, right? So now I'm going to say, this is the second part of the controversial part, that a big company can be disruptive, right? But you have to get comfortable with the following 4 items, right? You have to agree to implement those crazy ideas. Don't be afraid of competitive markets. Realize that to be really successful as a disruptive company, you're going to have to change user behavior, right? And you're going to have to find leadership that is outside the industry, because the guys who are coming from outside your industry don't know anything about your industry, so they're ready to do something very differently, right? Now, if you're able to get comfortable with all this and you're able to find the team, etc., try to isolate them from the rest of the organization, from the rest of the management structure. Put them in a completely different place. Give them the freedom to do what they do. Give them the resources and the capital, and let them fail, because guaranteed the first time around they're going to fail in whatever they're doing. The second time around they'll fail again, right? By the third or fourth time they're going to figure it out, and that's the beginning of creating the disruption, right? So this was the video that was going to come earlier.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
So this was the classic, Apple commercial from, I think it was like 95, 96, from that time forward. And, they nailed it, right? So you got to be crazy. You got to, I think Udena said, you got to be an outlier. You got to be an outlier if you really want to be disruptive. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Brian Beach. Brian and I have known each other for about 3 years. We've worked very closely together for the last 2 years. And during that time period, I have been nothing but a pain in the behind for him. I've always created trouble for him. Brian is the Senior Vice President of Cisco, which is the world's largest food distributor that does about $40 billion a year in revenue, and the President of Cisco Ventures. Brian Beach.
Thank you, Monty. Thank you, thank you. So, too loud. Sorry about that. I'll be quiet. I have the unenviable task of being the last guy standing, right? So I'm the last guy literally standing between you and happy hour. I'm not exactly sure how I drew that straw, but maybe it's because I am a guy in a big company trying to be disruptive, and Monty just spent 20 minutes saying how that can't happen. But then he said it maybe can happen, but you have to be crazy and you have to be from outside. So, I am the Senior VP at Cisco Corporation. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that company in just a minute. And my responsibility really is driving sort of the innovation and innovative strategy at a company that is a $46 billion company that maybe has not been that way historically. And I do come from the outside. I was brought in 4 years ago. And when I was brought in 4 years ago, I looked like this. So I really was crazy, and I was the crazy guy to try to do these kinds of things at Cisco. I don't look like that anymore. I'm going to explain why. So Cisco, if you don't know about Cisco, you probably don't. Historically, we've sort of taken the position of being kind of the silent partner of the restaurant owner-operator out there. And we're the largest in the world, largest food distributor, to the tune, again, of about $47 billion a year in revenue. We were started, actually, as a pretty disruptive and visionary company. Our founder in 1969 had this vision to change the way restaurants were getting their food from their suppliers. So historically, that had been done by multiple suppliers, say your fish guy, your meat guy, your produce guy, and national suppliers were doing some of their own distribution. And he saw an opportunity to put all that together and be a distributor, what's called a broadliner distributor, that is distributing everything on one truck. All the things you need at a restaurant coming from one truck in one delivery rather than multiple deliveries and multiple vendors. And he put together a few companies, and he created a national platform to do that. And he went public after a year. And we've grown from a $100 million company in 1969, 1970, when we went public, to that $46 billion company that we are today. And we did it by being pretty innovative, okay? Not innovative as it relates to maybe to technology and some of the things we're thinking about, but for example, we came up with a multi-temperature trailer so that we could bring frozen and fresh and dry goods all on one trailer. Doesn't seem very innovative, but in the 1969, 1970 timeframe, it was. So we've become massive with our success. You see that thing in the top right there. We move a lot of those things. We call those cases. We move a lot of food to the tune of about 1.5 billion cases a year. And on that truck, we drive about 300 million miles a year. So we're one of the top 2, 3, 4 largest logistics company in the United States. And we're worldwide, by the way, and worldwide in our definition today is not big enough, but we're also the largest in Canada. We're in the Bahamas, we're in Ireland, we're in Mexico, we're in Costa Rica. 50,000 employees strong, 193 locations, pushing all of those goods. But with that history and with that size come what I call some pretty powerful forces. And this is why I no longer look like that crazy guy with all the hair. See, I've lost all that hair because of the forces I'm going to describe to you right now. So these are the things that I've learned in my 4 years at Cisco that are the forces that we're dealing with as we try to drive out innovation and disruption. And the first is what I'm going to call the force of history and success. So with all that history and success that I just described to you, and that can also be described as culture, it's really hard to talk about changing your model or being innovative or being disruptive simply because we've known so much success from our history. So that's a really powerful force that we deal with all the time at Cisco. Another powerful force that we deal with is our massive size and scale. And I think you've heard both of these forces mentioned in other ways today, but our size, just that ability to be agile and to move quickly and to be flexible is really impacted by or inhibited by that massive size and scale. Another force that I think affects us all the time as we think about innovation and disruption is what I call this force of being very operational or day-to-day. We are, by our very nature, an operationally focused company. We deliver those 1.5 billion cases to restaurants every day within some delivery window. And remember, the things that we're delivering are perishables. So it's a very complicated environment, very day-to-day in our focus. It becomes very challenging for us to have a conversation with our teams about 3 years and 5 years and 7 years, 10 years from now. and what we're going to do not only to ourselves and think about being disruptive to ourselves, or what's going to come at us from other ways that we don't know today. That's really a challenging conversation inside a large environment like this. And then finally, this last force that I like to talk about, and I think we've heard it mentioned a couple of times today as well, is what I call this force of constantly playing defense. So not only are we big, which makes it hard to make decisions, we're also the number one player in the industry. And I think when you're that big, and when you are the number one player, you tend to think in a defensive mode. So to use a sports analogy, we tend to think like a defensive coordinator, or we play defense the entire game, whereas our competitors, or a startup, or some other thing that we don't know exists out there today, plays a very offensive-minded game. And I think that this is a force that can really inhibit us thinking about our business in new ways. So those are the four powerful forces that we're always dealing with at Cisco, that we're thinking about as a group that's driving the innovation story inside this company. So I put up there in quotes what Monty said at the end of his presentation. He spent the whole presentation saying he couldn't do this, but he changed his mind and said, look, in a big company, you actually can disrupt. But what is disruption? I think you really have to get a hold of that definition of that word, because you have to be really careful with the word disruption in a really big company. Because for the most part, I think the culture and the people see that word disruptive as just another way to say destructive. And there's a view sometimes that when you throw that word disruptive around, what you mean is, oh look, you have to take your business model and you have to blow it up and you have to start over because you have to be disruptive. And when you take that approach, or when you allow people to think that that's what that word means, it creates real problems for you. So you really have to be careful on this whole notion of disruption versus destruction. And some people in a large organization with this kind of culture are going to automatically think destruction. Okay, and I've heard a few times today that failures are good. I actually am a firm believer in that. You really get great learnings from failures. It's inevitable that when you do new things and you do big things, you're going to fail. But that's really hard inside this environment, inside a large company environment. So our failure is really good. Do you lose credibility, as Monty said in his discussion? Does it contribute to this whole notion of destruction when you're actually out there failing? Though you may be failing fast, and you may be trying to describe to the company the positive value that you get out of those learnings. In fact, that should be one of the metrics used in an ROI for an innovative story in a big company. That is, the learnings drives part of that ROI. That's a really challenging story nonetheless. So let's define disruption. And I like to think of it in two sort of buckets. I think of it as disrupting. I think traditionally, this is how we see it, by the way, disrupting what you do and how you do it. The Airbnb model, disrupting the way Hilton and Marriott do hotels. Okay, that's what you do and how you do it. But I think there's another disruption, and this is another disruption that becomes really important in a big company, and that is disrupting how you see yourself. How is it that you see yourself as a company, and how can we disrupt that? And I think in a big company like Cisco, that's where you start. We have got to start by transforming or disrupting the way that we see ourselves before we can ever get to a place where we're disrupting or changing the way we do what we do every day. Okay, so I'm kind of taking you through my journey in this big company and what I've learned as we've done that. And I think this is a really important component of really getting that disruptive story started at a big company. Okay, so for Cisco specifically, what do I mean by that? Well, today, we're an order taker and a distributor. Our position in this value chain, our position in this connecting farm to fork, is delivering those boxes on trucks. Okay, how do we transform ourselves from seeing ourselves that way to seeing ourselves as a solutions provider for the industry? How do we go beyond the food and provide solutions broadly across the industry? And then finally, one step further beyond that, is how do we now see ourselves as a data and information company? Yeah, this is the time I usually get thrown out of a meeting or thrown out of the room back at corporate offices, because this is really tough stuff for a big company like Cisco to get its arms around. But this is the transformation that we need to go through internally but before you can ever take on this notion of really being disruptive about who we are. Okay, so how do you get started on this? Well, Monty says you have to do something crazy. So we took a page out of Tesla's book, and we said, hey, we'll do something like this, okay? Let's do something crazy, and let's be really disruptive and see ourselves differently. And that didn't work, right? That didn't work at all. So what you really need to do seems so simple. What you really need is you need leadership that really believes in this, that is passionate about this, and talks about this all the time. From the CEO to the key leaders around that CEO. And it needs to be vocal leadership. Okay, that's a really critical element here. I think we all know that, we all talk about that, but it really is true. And I think what you also need are evangelists who think about this stuff every day and fight the good fight with passion around this every day. This notion of disruption in a big company and what it means, you have to fight the fight, and you have to be ready to fight the fight every day because it is a tough environment to live in. Okay, and then finally, you need some focus. You really do. You can't just broadly run around out there talking about disruption and broadly and with a wide net and sort of play around with multiple ideas and multiple disruptive ideas. It just won't work in a big company environment, so you need focus. Okay, you also need focus because it's an environment that's very short-term in its mindset and what it thinks about every day. It's a public company environment. It's thinking about those financials. It's thinking about all those key metrics that big companies think about every day. And if you can't be focused in your strategy to drive an innovation model, then you're going to really struggle to get it off the ground. But none of that is really easy at all. Okay? And you really, I'm going to argue against Monty right now, you really can't do those crazy things that he talked about, because if you do those crazy things, at least in the early days, what will happen is the core of that large organization is going to isolate you and it's going to eat you alive. It's kind of like antibodies inside the human body, okay? It'll see that foreign object or that foreign concept, that disruptive nature, and it will isolate it and it will eat it alive. So you have to be careful with how crazy you are and what sort of crazy things you do at the beginning. Okay, I really do believe in that. So we do focus at Cisco, and I'm going to take you through how we focus in these early days to really, again, drive down this path of changing the way we see ourselves. How do we see ourselves in a disruptive way and move down this path of again, looking at ourselves like a solutions provider? Well, we started with what we think is an area that's ripe for disruption, an area that's ripe with opportunity, and that is restaurant technology. So while we deliver food and some other solutions to just about every restaurant you can think of, from the smallest restaurants to the largest chains, an area that's really underserved and just emerging in the restaurant world is restaurant tech. So we thought, well, look, if we really believe in this concept of moving beyond the food and bringing solutions to our customers, let's focus first on restaurant technology. It's a place where our customers are confused, they don't understand it, they don't get it. So why don't we become that expert in restaurant technology? And so we had two choices when we decided to do that. We could do it on the 6th floor of corporate headquarters in Houston, Texas, with the great IT teams that we have there and the great folks that we have, or we could go out there and look for a group that's a startup environment that's being disruptive and is thinking about these things and already doing some of that. And of course, that's the approach we took. So we went out there and we invested in a handful of companies, but our biggest and most important investment was in LeapSet. And then we took that one step further after we proved it out a little bit, and we acquired LeapSet. So LeapSet, here in Sri Lanka and in Silicon Valley, is the division of Cisco, if you will, that's thinking out of the box, that's being disruptive, that understands how things are changing really fast and is creating really great restaurant technology solutions for us to bring to our customers. So that's what you see in that picture there, right? You see those technology solutions and you see the teams here in Sri Lanka and you see the team in Silicon Valley really bringing that to Cisco. So they're allowing us to look at ourselves in a different way, as a solutions provider and as an innovative team that's thinking in new ways. That was a really important start for us. The other area of focus for us in this innovation group at Cisco is the millennials. And I've heard that talked about a little bit today, and even to some extent Generation Z. But this millennial thing is a really big deal. And we've elected to take this as another area for us to focus on in these early days at Cisco around changing the way we see ourselves. See, I think this millennial thing is kind of interesting because I've heard it talked about today, and I often hear it talked about as it relates to the changing taste of customer or the changing desires, demands, and needs of customers. And I think that's really important. I think that's absolutely critical. But where it's also really important is the forced change that it drives upon a large organization, or any organization, quite frankly, in the form of its future employees being from that generation. So you think about a Cisco corporation for a second with 50,000 employees worldwide, and then you start thinking about the fact that the millennial generation will make up 50% of the US workforce within the next 5 years. And that those millennials think and act and look different than what we have traditionally hired in our history. It's a generation where 75% of them think about work-life balance before they ever think about salary. It's a generation that wants to work in groups and informal atmospheres and wants to make decisions at groups. And it wants to work for a company that stands for something. And it wants to work for a company that has meaning in thoughts provided, not tenure. And it's a generation that thinks of their boss not as a manager or a boss, but as a coach or a mentor. Now, we're not structured or set up that way. Yet I'm telling you that 50% of the US workforce will come from that generation within 5 years. So that generation will force change upon the way we look at ourselves internally. And I think that generation is also our customer of tomorrow. So the restaurant owner-operator of tomorrow will be a millennial. And they're going to have a whole different set of expectations around the customer experience than what we do today. Our customer experience today is driven very much by a very strong and personal relationship among our 8,500, so our 8,000 plus salespeople and the restaurants that are our customers. But those customers of tomorrow are going to demand different kinds of things in that relationship, including technology, including real-time information and transparency, some of the things we've heard about today. So we got to think about how that customer is going to see us in a different way. And then finally, the end consumer, who I think is going to continue to demand different things when they're eating away from home. Somebody talked about Chipotle earlier today. You're going to continue to see significant change around what the consumer or what that restaurant guest demands from their eating away from home experience. They care about local and organic and healthy and nutritional stuff. They care about flavors and ethnic influences. They care about telling a story through food, their experiences through food. So I think that will have a profound impact on our product mix and our customer mix. Okay, so these are the two areas where we as the innovation team at Cisco are focused right now. How do we drive home this concept of being a solutions provider, starting with restaurant technology and great teams of people who are helping us think about that? And then how do we also get ready to look at ourselves in a different way based on the impact and the power of the millennial generation on our employee base, our customer base, and on the end consumer who's eating away from home? Okay, those are important concepts for us today. That's our early focus. And we can't really disrupt anything until we disrupt the way we see ourselves. Okay, and right now we see ourselves this way. We connect the farm to that kitchen. And we think of ourselves as driving tremendous value through our logistics and our expertise in getting that food delivered in a very safe way, always on time, and that all is really important stuff. I don't ever mean this is certainly another reason I get thrown out of meetings. Okay, when I say those things, I don't ever mean to say those things because those are bad, or I don't mean to sound negative when I talk about those things. We add tremendous value in the supply chain by doing what we do. Okay, but we have to take that up a notch, and we have to take that to the next level because, as we all agree, nobody is exempt from being disrupted, from new ideas from a competitor or otherwise. So when we add this concept of solutions, we have again transformed ourselves or disrupted ourselves from that logistics company that's generating value from farm to fork based on our trucks and our warehouses and our boxes to a solutions provider, providing solutions to the industry. And then finally, the large transformation or the large disruption comes when we move to a place that says, hey, look, really, we see ourselves now as generating value from farm to fork, but not based on those trucks or those boxes, but based on the data and the information that we have. Because nobody has the same kind of data and information we have from farm to fork, connecting the farm to the consumer. So that is when you see yourself in a different way. That is when you have disrupted your internal culture and really set the platform to now do what really matters and think about who you are and what you do and how you disrupt that. And only then can we do that. Only then can we think about me having that crazy hair again and delivering a case with drones or delivering our food in a different way. Okay, but first we got to change the way we see ourselves before we get there. Okay, that's the journey that we're on at Cisco. That's the challenging journey that we're on as a multi-billion-dollar Fortune 60 company that's really thinking about these things from an innovation and disruption perspective. So thank you all very much. I hope I kept you awake. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Brian. I think we take a break for the commercials. People to pay the bills.
Today, tomorrow, and into the future. Sampath Bank, we present your future.
It's Sing a Mega Big Experience.
Sing Mega, the big experience.
The fastest growing mobile 4G LTE network in Sri Lanka. Morabito, we care, always.
Vijay Newspapers, helping shape opinions.
Great. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a quick couple of things. Brian landed here at 1 o'clock today in the morning. Landed here at 1 o'clock in the morning, right? Yeah, so I just wanted to say that you are here and really appreciate it. Mani was...
Mic on? I thought you were saying that because the presentation was lousy.
No, actually, fantastic job. Thank you so much, Brian. It was very interesting. Mani, big launch yesterday. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Wanted to say congratulations on that. Maybe another round of applause for LeapSet for the launch. And also being a principal sponsor for this event, we really appreciate that. So Shahani, I think the panel discussion. The number I believe is seen. I start. Please send any questions you have. We want to make it as interactive as possible, so it will be very, very useful. If you guys anything that you agree, disagree with what we have presented so far, even the expert panel like this, I don't think you will get to speak to them or ask questions every day. So please send that across to us. I think we had a brief chat before, and I think one of the things which struck me was you have broken away from, you are in ways a disruptive nature itself as a person, because whereas everyone is talking about staying focused to a business, doing just making sure that it gets really successful. You have gone ahead and started 3 businesses, very interesting 3 businesses itself. I will not go to the extent of saying they are disruptive or not, because I know they are very, very young in their journey. Would you mind explaining us why you started, first of all, 3 companies in the first place, and why do you think they are disruptive in its nature?
Okay, yeah. I don't know whether what I'm doing is disruptive or not, because what I have realized is that looking back, these things, it just panned out. That's just the way it happened. So starting from, when I started the first company, I had no idea that I would end up with 3 companies. The first one was started simply because after being in the industry, I joined the government, then I joined academia, and then I decided I wanted to get back into industry and started looking for a job and didn't get anything nice, good. So I guess my academic experience didn't really help me, or I don't know what. So that's when I happened to bump into a good friend and ex-Virtusan, Prasad Nanyakara, and we just got talking and we thought, okay, hey, why don't we just start up a company, right? So the no job offers led to plan B. Let's start up our own company. And we really, that happened very organically, because we were both, we had significant experience in the services domain. We just very naturally thought of starting a company in that domain, IT services. But then we started thinking, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we can bring that Silicon Valley kind of high technology, cool solutions to Sri Lanka? Do it here. So that's when we kind of refined our business model. So far it has been going great. We've done some products in the Bitcoin space. I don't know whether most of you are familiar with cryptocurrencies. So we were one of the first companies in Sri Lanka, or maybe the only company who has done work with cryptocurrency.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind explaining a little bit for the many like me who doesn't know what that is?
How many of you have heard of Bitcoins?
Okay.
Okay, smattering. Okay. So Bitcoins are cryptocurrencies. That is, there is no real money exchange. There is no, it's a kind of a virtual money, but it is different from electronic transactions, which also can be thought of as virtual financial transactions. With Bitcoin, with cryptocurrency, the difference is that it is entirely P2P based. So every single transaction from the very history of the start of Bitcoin is recorded, and everyone has access to those records. So it's open P2P transactions. So in effect, they say that you can't do, you can't go wrong with anything. And in fact, that same model they're thinking of building into share transactions and so on. So it's very interesting. Technically, a technical solution became a cryptocurrency. So we essentially, that's how Oxenta, the first company, started. Then the third company is an offshoot of Oxenta, because after some time we realized that right here in Sri Lanka there were really great ideas, just like in Silicon Valley, right? And wouldn't it be cool? I mean, we loved building products and, realizing ideas. So we were wondering, why not do it here as well? But the problem here is that the investment culture is not very strong. And the banks don't like taking risks.
We already covered that in the morning hours about the banks and investments.
I'm sorry if Sampath Bank is here, but I mean, I'm sure you like to take risks, and I would love to talk to you afterwards. But for now, I mean, that's what we figured. So then the next category of people who have money to invest and who are willing to take risks are essentially the people who work in the stock market. the people who buy shares and so on. So we thought of partnering with the largest stockbroker investment firm in Sri Lanka, and that's exactly what we did. We partnered with Capital Trust Holdings, and we created CAPAC. And they also brought in a lot of connections and networking for us in the financial industry, because we have a lot of experience doing engineering. So it was a win-win kind of solution. Smart. Then the second, so that's CapExes. I'll explain Oxen and CapExes, and so you can see all these things just happened. And the second one is from my I will project I had tell me what actually two here. I just when I started no other
To the Shah. I think focused on elaborate a little.
So, marketing model and two back in the state on the phone. Slide deck. These to be a little bit of an art, back to the Mad Men, ad men days of the 50s and 60s, and then kind of the old concept of a sleazy car salesman, but nowadays there can actually take to create a high velocity sales team now, and it's a bit of a culture shock for Cisco.
Fantastic. Thanks, Werner. Before I move to Tumindra and ask you a question, but I think there are a couple of things. There was a question asked, do any of you growth companies and startups use digital marketing platforms like Hootsuite, Parlay? I'm not sure about Parlay, but I'm sure Hootsuite is definitely used. The third one you said, I'm not sure at all, because the third one, the platform that is mentioned is Tinder. Not sure whether it is used for startups. Moving on. For digital marketing, I'm pretty sure Tinder is probably not used for that. Yeah. But money business.
You look were pushed to do.
So a new revenue generating profitable mechanisms. I know you have had an experience while you were heading Tisalad in Sri Lanka. Would you like to explain that? Because I believe that may be a very good disruptive model.
Yeah, thanks. I think, first of all, the story about big companies, I think it's a story about all big companies struggling at one given point of time and looking for new sources of revenues. And as you said, everybody thinks telcos are cash rich. Telcos were cash rich until the competitive became too much. The competition became too much because everybody wants to go where the cash is. And then it's time to think differently, and it's time to think how could you disrupt and how and can you disrupt. And to some extent, I disagree that big companies can't be disruptive. I think big companies can be disruptive as long as that mindset is there. As long as you let people be crazy, right? And you encourage that craziness and that disruptive thinking and make it happen. So it doesn't have to be always a startup that has to be disruptive. I'll give you an example. In our telco culture, it was always control. It was always saying we are the big guys, so you guys, whoever who comes to us, has obviously come kneeling to us, and that was like the whole thing about being a telco and providing products. So there was always this case of a lot of young people, there were small startups, maybe established companies coming to you and saying, look, I've got this product, I like to hook up with you. And then we would say, yes, let's evaluate, let's take it through the process, and then say, yes, it looks good, we'll start a revenue share, but you guys get 10 to 15% of the revenue, everything else is ours because you can't do without us. And during this time, it was about 3-4 years ago, we thought, let's be different and let's open ourselves up to everybody. So this is in the telco application development space. This was prior to, all these smartphones coming into the picture and smartphone apps getting off ground. So it was more SMS-based apps. We said anybody can actually develop apps on our network. We created, together with a partner, a software, an interface so that people could come and develop apps. And we opened up and said that we'll give 70% of the revenue to the developer. It was very disruptive, very, challenging because so many said, are you crazy? In fact, even I had to go in front of the regulator because I had to sort of justify the payoffs. The regulator got excited saying, if you're going to give 70% of the revenues to these guys, you would charge a lot to the customer, we don't want that, etc., etc. But the solution, which was at that time we called AppZone, because anybody with a little bit of knowledge about programming could come and actually do apps on the network, subsequently was also implemented by another telco here. And today, both us and them, I think get about 2 to 5% of their revenues, top line revenues out of this, solution. So big companies also can become disruptive as long as they're willing to break away those shackles and think differently, willing to take the risk and think crazy. Yes, you need to be thinking crazy.
But do you really think that while you have to, you're in a fight to protect your existing business, can you really drive your business to be disruptive?
You need to think beyond being protective. I think that's the first step of the first mistake is that we always think we need to protect. I mean, you said the life is 10 years, and I don't think the life is 10 years because your life will be 10 years if you think protective again. I've got this business, I made it through a disruptive model, but now I need to protect it. And at the moment you start thinking I need to protect it, that's when you fail. So you need to challenge yourself, and you need to be ready to take that challenge. So if you go to be protective, then you lose it for sure.
Sure. So Brian, I think you saw the question on the screen. I'll read it out for you. But before that, I'd like to ask, is there any companies that you see in Sri Lanka that you really consider yourself as really disruptive? Would you mind just SMSing some of the names just for us to know that, as an audience, the companies that you have now considered to be like really disruptive in Sri Lanka? It could be IT, it could be manufacturing, it could be anything. Would be really great to get a pulse of how you guys perceive disruption in Sri Lanka. Brian, the question to you is, how do you measure investment in disruptive projects?
Yeah,
Sorry, just jump. Prior to disruptive idea delivering any worthwhile returns, example, how did you measure the investment in LeapSet?
And the question rightly points out that it's too early to measure success based on financial returns and worthwhile returns in that regard. We're only 2 years into this journey. But where we focus on the kinds of things that I think generate a return are somewhat qualitative today. So that is, what learnings do we get out of this? Not only learnings about our customers and what they want and what they need and how technology is becoming a larger part of their life every day, but also learnings about ourselves. And Warner pointed out some of the things that we've learned about ourselves and how ready is our sales force to talk about a larger value proposition and how ready is that sales force to talk about solutions that go beyond the food. Those are the kinds of learnings we get out of this. That really becomes part of the sort of return on investment story, if you will. And I think as well, we've been able in these early days to look at some metrics around stickiness and the impact of these solutions on stickiness of a customer, and those kinds of things are important to us as well. So while the financial returns aren't there yet because it's too early, some of those other important pieces are.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brian. Mani, I think you saw the question. I think that's a very important question. Things going great, hitting a 10 billion evaluation is fine, but how do you know that things have started to go south?
So it probably happens 2 days after you started doing it, right? So I'll give you a quick example on the LeapSet journey. So when we first started, the idea was not what we're doing right now, which is a technology platform for the restaurant industry. The beginning of LeapSet was the following. If you look at companies like Google, Facebook, eBay, Yahoo, Yelp, Groupon, I can go on and on. All these companies do one thing and one thing alone, right? They're an intermediary between a buyer and a seller, right? The actual product may be search, maybe reviews, maybe couponing, but ultimately where they create value and make all their money is by bringing a buyer and a seller together. Now, if you think about the two sides of that, on the buyer side, most of the time the buyer is a consumer. The single best way to reach that customer is on their mobile phone. So think of the mobile phone as the gateway to the buyer, to the consumer. So that gateway is owned by two companies, Apple and Google, which puts them in a very enviable position because the only way to reach the consumer is by going through either the Android or the iPhone platform. What about on the seller side, right? What's the product, what's the hardware, software combination that, connects you to every single seller, which for the most part are businesses, right? It didn't exist, and that's the void that LeapSet wanted to fill. It doesn't exist still, right? So we decided, much like the mobile phone, the ideal product for the seller side is a point-of-sale system. Why? Because the business owner, at that point, not just restaurants, any business owner, is going to run their business on our point of sale. So they're going to touch our product constantly. We have access to all their data. We're in their face. So now we become the gateway to the business. That was how we started LeapSet. And when we started it, we decided, hey, this is totally disruptive, right? What we discovered a year later when we launched our first product was that every single business wants a different point-of-sale system. So unlike a mobile phone, there was no way to build a one-system-fits-all, right? And that was our first pivot. So that was the first moment we decided, oh, well, this is no longer disruptive, right? Am I going to get a job now? But we said, well, what do we do about it? Well, we picked an industry. At that point, we had all the intentions of going after every industry, but we picked the restaurant industry. Why? Because restaurants touch consumers more often than any other industry. And we decided, let's build a point of sale for the restaurant industry. So we started doing that and continued to do that a year later. And then we ran into a second problem, right? This time around, the issue was the following. There's roughly 1 million restaurants in the US. About half of them use a point-of-sale system. That's 500,000. And the decision to buy a new point-of-sale system happens once every 7 years. So if I get my math right, that's about roughly 75,000 a year, right? So there's no way we can get the market share that we need to become that gateway. So then, once again, this is no longer disruptive. The idea, what we're going to do about it? Well, that's when we got to the current status of doing things. So no, let's build multiple products, and any one of them could be the gateway. So every startup goes through that cycle, right? So I think it's not a moment where you decide, this is no longer a disruptive idea. It's a moment when you decide, I need to evolve to continue to be disruptive. Right?
So there's levels of iteration also involved before you call it, okay, it's not going to work out.
Absolutely. I mean, it's some people call it an iteration, some people call it a pivot. That's exactly right, yeah.
Thanks, man. Werner, quick question. Have you been to Sri Lanka before, or this is your first time?
This is my first time.
Okay. So I actually wanted to ask this question, then I will pass this question to Dharmendra. I'll come back to you for another question. Dharmendra, we hear fantastic numbers here, but these numbers are probably very US-centric, if you don't mind me saying that. So can disruption we see from these examples, can they really exist in that form and shape in our markets where our numbers were 21 million, we're talking about 5 million people, internet users?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of, it's not a matter of numbers. Yes, I mean, anything is obviously far easier. I would not say easier, but in terms of market size, the US is huge. So a lot of success stories come from there as a result of it. But then look at disruptive solutions or businesses that have started. I mean, look at e-channeling. It's one of the first, I would say, one of the early disruptive businesses that we saw, right? We today it's part of our lifestyle, right? and it's still there. I think it's over 10 years, right?
Yes.
So it can. I mean, if it does do cater to the market, though I don't think the market size is really an issue, right? I mean, is it a product that you can take out there to the world? No, that's a different question. It all depends on on what your product is. But the market size here is quite large enough if you do come with the right idea or the crazy idea. I mean, e-channeling struggled at the early stages, even to get across the idea to doctors. But today you don't get a doctor who is not listed in it, right?
Understood. Thanks, Subin. So Vernon, the question is, I think it comes from the screen as well, but I wanted to, I think I'll just modify that because I think it's too much of a broad, open-ended question. So I think we're talking about disruptive business models, and I think what the question here means is that if everyone start doing that, what's going to happen to the existing businesses and etc. What is your take on it? I think what they're probably asking is that are big businesses going to get into trouble repeatedly by smaller companies keep challenging it, and does that mean that how their future and progression, how would that evolve? And it's just a very open question, but do you have any thoughts that you could share with us on that?
So just repeat the question again. So smaller companies pecking at larger companies, is that kind of what we're getting at?
Yeah, I think what is that smaller companies with disruptive innovation, utilizing disruptive innovation and business models are obviously challenging big businesses. So what is the future of big business that are existing I think is the question they have asked here.
Sure. Yeah, I guess it was funny just to kind of merge these, you asked about disruption here in Sri Lanka, but if you look at smaller companies and, I guess you could call Google's not really a small company, but they're still disrupting every single day. If you guys are familiar with what Google's doing with their car, they built a car from the ground up. It's a driverless car. There's estimates that in 2035, there's going to be 54 million autonomous vehicles on Earth. There's no reason that a smaller company couldn't, automobile companies are about to get disrupted. I sold my car when I was in New York in 2008, and I've lived in New York City, and I lived in San Francisco. I haven't had a car. So instead of paying a car payment, insurance, and gas and repairs, I use Uber nowadays almost exclusively. Actually, I drive to work every single day. It's a startup company called Magic Bus. They pick me up, they drive me to my office, and it's $7 each way. So someone's going to come along, and Google's kind of doing it right now, and realize that you don't really need to own a personal car. And there are companies like GetAround that are doing what Airbnb does to allow people to rent out their cars, but there's going to be a future where all these tuk-tuks are going to have no driver, and you're going to be able to pay a couple dollars to get wherever you want, and it's happening right now. So it's interesting to see it would be interesting to see what happens here 10 or 20 years from now.
Thanks, Werner. I think there are one or two other questions that come. So Shahani, I think for you specifically, I'll ask this question. How do you run 3 companies? Is the question at the same time. And then, so I think basically, some tips and advices about managing your workload across 3 different companies. Obviously, you're at sea level for all 3 companies, etc. Is the question they have asked.
Okay, so how do you run 3 companies?
Maybe not so much on disruptive innovation. Maybe the way you are managing could be a disruptive.
Okay, I think pretty much the millions of working mothers around the world can answer that question. How do you run 3 companies at the same time? Because it's just about balance, right? In terms of, there are definitely strategies that I adopted. For instance, in the Emojot, the product company, 2 of my co-founders was just out of university, and then there was myself, and I knew that I needed, you always need some kind of a balance in that co-founding team, and if I realized I needed someone else who was familiar with that space, who could connect very well with those students, because the students did tend to view me as still as more of their teacher or supervisor, not really their equal, so I needed to kind of get some time to erase that. So I looked out for a co-founder who was in that space, who could do that. And looking around, I touched upon Manjula Disanayake, who lives in Australia, who was just finishing up his PhD there. And got him on board as a co-founder, so that kind of solved it. So I think in terms of a strategy, the only way you can do something together, multiple things, is if you have the proper team in all of those places. I mean, that truly is the key, because if not, you can't handle everything.
Thank you, Shani. There were a couple of other messages came, but I'm sad to say that we've almost run out of time. It's almost 5:25, I think. So we'll take 5 more minutes. I'd like to start from that corner, Mani. Would you like to share your couple of final thoughts so that we could conclude our last session for the day?
Sure. So I want to admit that I purposefully want to be controversial, which is why I came here, with the theme that big companies cannot disrupt. But, in the end, I agree. It's not about being a big company or a small company. It's about really the mindset, right? It's can you get to a stage where you're able to think, really at the ends and not in the middle. And really, are you willing to take the risk? Are you willing to learn from your failures? And if you have those characteristics, whether you're a big company or a small company, you can be disruptive. So that's my final thought.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Actually, I'll build on that, and I would say you have to realize in a large company or in any company at the end of the day that the paradigm has shifted. And what has historically been the case of the big eating the small has really transformed or changed to the world where it's the fast eating the slow. And I think you have to recognize that doesn't mean that you can't be a big company and be successful in the new paradigm. You just have to recognize that speed and agility and thinking in new ways becomes much more critical than it ever has been in the past. So I think that's the take I would have on where we are today, and really think about speed and how that matters.
Yeah, I think, adding into it, that's exactly it, and that's where the startups actually do become more disruptive because of the agility and the speed. But I think the most important thing is that you don't need to think, or you don't need to now go look for disruptive ideas. I think what you need is a crazy idea and the willingness to take that risk, put your time and money on it, and if you believe in it, to make it happen. The value about, again, startups is that they have that freedom of taking risks, and big companies are scared of taking risks. And so if you're willing to take the risk, and also, as you said very correctly, if you're willing to change. Because when you saw that you 1 year down the road, your earlier thought of being a point of sale is not going to work, right? You were ready to change, and that's, I think, is the most important second step, that you can't have a very strong idea and think that I won't change and this is what I want to make work. So you need to be flexible, you need to work around the idea and take it forward.
I'll go on the same theme of speed here. So going back to advice for disruptive companies is to create high velocity sales models. And the easiest way to do that is just to maximize your time. It's something that I deal with my sales team every single day. It's the one precious resource that you can't buy, you can't get time back. So instead of resisting virtual technologies, virtual presentation software, things of that, which a lot of people do, embrace them. It's a much more efficient use of your time. It took me 2 days to get here almost. So, that would kind of be my one advice. I mean, if you look at what online dating, everybody thought online dating was something that people hid and it was like taboo 10 years ago, but now everybody's completely cool with it. So, I've even had to get my sales team over the hump of doing a virtual presentation is no different than being there in person. You can get everything accomplished. So Embrace technology, use it to your advantage, create a high velocity sales team.
So in terms of disruption, what I've realized is I've kind of noticed that something is disruptive only when I've looked back. I didn't really realize it as things were going on. It's something that you feel deep inside, but you're not really sure until someone else validates it. And the day people come and say, wow, or how come nobody else thought of doing it, that's when you kind of know you hit on a disruptive idea or a disruptive product. And in terms of starting up companies on that disruptive model, I mean, at the end of the day, if you know that it's all great when you just love every minute of what you're doing, and it doesn't feel like work. So.
Thank you, dear panelists. Thank you, LeapSet, for being a principal sponsor, and thank you for being a very patient audience. I know it had been a long day. The good news is that we had come to an end. 2 books recommended, Innovator's Dilemma and Innovator's Solution. I think those are the 2 books written by an author called Clayton M Christensen, a Harvard business professor, who basically coined the word and also brought disruptive innovation, I think, more to the light of the society. I'm sure you have been doing it before, but he's the guy who put a nice word to it. Thank you very much, and Lakshman, over to you.
Thank you. Before I thank our panel, 2 pleasant tasks. First, the winners of Lego competition. If my memory serves right, the winner gets first class air tickets to Las Vegas, and everybody, each one gets $1,000, $1,000, not Sri Lankan rupees. But in my old advanced age, my memory sometimes fails. So the first position, table number 25, they go to Las Vegas. Second, table number 6, I think they're going to Hong Kong. Yeah. And the third position goes to table 8. Dinner vouchers at King of Burgers, Slave Island. A disruptive business, I was joking, you all know that. And the next pleasant task to invite Sanjay Gunawardana, AGM Strategic Planning and Disruption and Research, Sampath Bank. Not credit card, business card. Sanjay. Raga, Madhushanka, business analyst, Linia Intimo. Agnes, not here? Darshana Gudasekara, Chief Financial Officer, MJF Holdings Limited, Delma. Darshana. Sorry, Darshana is not here. Rovidu. Yeah, Rovidu. Oh, come on. Rovidu, yes. Rovidu is not here. Thank you very much. Pradeep Devaraj, Marketing Manager, Fonterra. Pradeep, are you here? No? Ehanta Sirisena, Managing Director, MAK Technologies, MAC Technologies. Thank you so much, Sanjay. And as I mentioned in the morning, beneficiary charity is Candlelight, founded by Captain LBO. We will be making a donation to them in lieu of honorarium to all our speakers. Finally, okay, final session has come to end. Thank you so much, Mani and Brian, for the exciting presentation. Domi, Wana, Shahani, and Kohan joining us in this final session. Please put your hands together and thank them. And please bear with me another 2 minutes, 2 more minutes. I would like to once again thank LeapSet for joining us, for working with us on the content, working with us on the logistics, doing this great, Lego competition, and we had spent a lot of time together, challenging each other, try to come out with the best possible content. And it is wonderful to have partners like LeapSet who challenge our thinking and taking this event to the next level. Thank you so much, Shanil, Rasika, Mani, and everybody. I'm sorry that Stefan is not here today, and who worked hard with us making this happen. And Singer, Sampath Bank, and Morabito, our long-standing partners. These 3 companies have been with us for the last 15 years, helping us, partnering with us in number of events we have conducted, and also Vijaya and Corporate Image for their support. And a big thank you to all the 29 speakers. All of them are very busy people, very senior people, and despite all their busy schedules, and they really worked hard. And all the 5 session chairs, I know how they worked hard. They got connected with the speakers, the panelists, and had discussions, tried to make the sessions as wonderful, productive, enlightening, insightful, thought-provoking sessions. And finally, to all of you taking your time off for one full day, one full working day, and being here today, and the organizations you represent. And we had over, I think, 300 participants today coming from over 100 organizations. That is wonderful to have all of you. And thank you for your kind participation and staying here throughout 5 sessions. And I'm extremely sorry, there's not much of entertainment in our sessions because we are a content-focused company. And we believe that you are here and our speakers are here. It is our duty to make sure every minute of this possible minute of this conference, our summits, that we focus on content. And we are a content, we don't teach people new skills, but we want people to reprogram their minds, rethink the way they conduct themselves, path their businesses, operating models, business models, etc. So our job as a content company is to challenge everybody. I believe with that, I would like you to invite you to the most looked after event of the year, cocktails, and have a pleasant evening. Thank you so much.
Every big dream needs a gentle push.